Hey there, I'm Jane Sawyer, and this is a 31 Monsters Roundup. This October, I set out to prove that if you can sculpt a basic blob shape, you can make almost anything. So I made a list of your favorite spooky monsters and attempted to make one for every day of the month. Each monster started out as a basic paper mache blob shape. I made these by cutting out some cardboard circles, gluing a lunch bag around the circle, stuffing that with some balled up newspaper, and then coating that all in 4 layers of paper mache. From there, we randomly drew for order from my list and got to sculpting. So I've already posted all 31 of those step-by-step videos, so you can craft along if you want to. And in those videos, I also gave you a little history of each monster and how they tie into our Halloween culture today. In this video, I'm going to give you a little recap of all 31 monsters, talk about how successful I think each project was, what I learned along the way, and how creepy and cute they are. I'm going to tell you which ones are my favorite, which one I hate, and which one I never actually finish. I'm also hoping you'll tell me your favorite ones in the comments, but you should definitely watch the end until you decide. Also, spoilers for how these all turned out. If you want to go into the process video for each monster, not knowing how they turned out, and I will link the playlist in the video description so you can go watch everything first, but consider this your warning. Okay, let's get started. If you see me looking down here, it's just because I have my nose down here. I'm not too great at yapping off the cuff, so it was better for me and for you that I put some notes together. Our first monster was the mummy, and I had a good idea of where I wanted this project to go from the start. I thought it would be really cool to cut into the blob shape and then build him a body cavity that we could see through his bandages into. I knew I wanted to put like a red stylized heart in there, so I knew I would have to go for a more cartoony character design to be able to pull that off. I think the purple behind his eyes and his tiny blue little pupils help pull that idea together. He has an expression that he's like a monster who's almost scared of himself, which I love. When I was making this one, I just debated on what to use for the bandages for a really long time, but I finally settled on using cheesecloth, and I was worried it was going to be a bit of a frustrating nightmare with threads coming off everywhere and the cloth sticking to itself. And that did happen a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. And in the end, all the bandages ended up looking really great. I think a little dry brushing with some brown paint would have really brought home the look of his finish. The bandages are a little bit too perfectly white, in my opinion, right now, but I still think he's pretty cute. For cuteness, I'm going to give him a 10 out of 10. For creepiness, I think he gets a 1. And overall, I really enjoy this project. I'm going to give him a solid 8.5 out of 10. Day 2 brought us the Cyclops. This was a pretty straightforward build. There's no really huge design challenges with the Cyclops to make it recognizable other than to simply just give it one eye. I think it's nearly impossible to make a Cyclops that doesn't look at least a little bit goofy, so I decided to lean into that here, and I just gave him a big old goofy grin. The only real challenge I had with this one is that I didn't give myself a lot of space to make him a nose. It really looks like his nose is sitting on his top lip, because it is. I think his big monkey ears are perfect though. They're very well suited to him. I also really like the paint job. I liked the blending of the light teal and the darker periwinkle blue. I think that came out really well. For cuteness, I think he gets an 8. For creepiness, I think he gets a 1. All in all, I'm gonna give him a 7. I think he's pretty good, but he's not all that special. Day 3 was the Ogre. The design challenge with this one was to make it look like an ogre without having a whole body to work with, because we're obviously trying to stick to this basic blob shape. And also, you know, I didn't just want to make Shrek. I think the sketch I started with was pretty solid, but when it came to building it, I had a bit of trouble trying to execute. My first try trying to build his head, I didn't quite get the proportions right, and it took me a lot of trial and error, which you saw, to get the proportions right. I don't think he really came together until the very end where we squared up his jaw and then it was really starting to give Ogre. I love the wash effect we used on this guy. I think it really suits him. For cuteness, I think he gets a 6. And for creepiness, I'm gonna go with a 2. And for overall, I'm gonna go with another 7. I mean, he's fine. He's a good ogre. He just doesn't have a lot of personality. And I mean, I guess ogres don't, but this one wasn't that exciting to me. I still think it's good. I'm just not like super pumped about it. On our 4th day is our little ghost. You might have noticed throughout I varied up the sizes of the blobs a little bit, and I think this one is our smallest monster. This is the first monster where I tried that aluminum foil technique to make the fabric folds. I think that technique worked out pretty well, and it'll be a good one to have in my toolkit. I really like the face we sculpted. It's obviously inspired by the ghost face mask from the Scream movies. It was really simple, but I think using some air dry clay to give the face some dimension really was effective. I thought the little bit of clear acrylic we used to bring the ghost off the table a little bit so some light could pass underneath was a really nice touch. I think it gives the ghost more of an airy feeling. I'm also really happy with the spatter technique I decided to put on last minute. I think this just makes a pretty standard looking ghost, a little more creepy and a little more unique. I'm gonna give him a 5 for cuteness and a 6 for creepiness. Originally, I was only gonna give this one a 7, but I think I'm gonna bump him up to a 7.5 because even though my ghost is pretty standard, I think I did manage to make him a little bit unique. Okay, the black cat is day 5 in this series. We had a lot of firsts for this series in this project. This is the first monster where we used colored paper to make the gums. We used fabric, dipped it in glue to make lips for the first time in this series on this monster. This is also the first project in the series where we used a foam hair roller. If you remember, we used that for his little tail. This is also the first project where I forgot to film something. I forgot to film me making his nose, and unfortunately that happened a few more times in this series. I really love the vintage inspired paint job we decided to go for. I think this cat came out looking appropriately bizarre. There's not much I'd change about him. I'm gonna give him a 7 for cuteness, a 7 for creepiness, and an 8 overall. Day 6 brought Owl Man into our lives. And I'm sure for some of you, this was the first time you've ever heard of this cryptid. I just think he's very cool, a really interesting character, and I like the lore about him. The design challenge with this one was obviously to make him look like a half man, half owl without having humanoid limbs, because again, we're obviously just using a blob shape here. I accomplished this by giving him a half beak, half monster mouth. So I think this makes it obvious that he's not just an owl. Also, when I made his wings, I really tried to go for a shape that looks like an outstretched arm. I think in the end, you can definitely tell that this is a monster, not a normal owl. I think he turned out to be very creepy. I'm gonna give him a 3 for cuteness and an 8 for creepiness. Overall, I'm gonna give him a 6.5. I think if I had had more time, the character design could have been a little bit stronger. I also don't really like the paint job we settled on. He's just a little too beige for me. But I mean, he's cool. I'm not gonna throw him away or anything. We'll round out the 7th day with our creepy clown project. I loved this guy when I finished him, and I still love him today. I think using the yogurt spoons as molds for the eyes was a really clever idea. I think his teeth and mouth turned out really good. His smile is crazy. You might recall that I initially sculpted some much larger ears from him, and I think going with the smaller ears was definitely the right call. This is the first sculpture in the series where we mixed some chalk pastel into some resin to make some goo that was dripping out of his mouth. I really love how that ended up turning out. This was also the first project that we painted with a makeup sponge, and I ended up using that technique quite a bit on future projects in the series. His little rubber nose was so fun to make, and I think the glossy resin on top of the red paint just turned out so perfectly. I think his hair turned out really nicely too. All in all, I just really love this guy. I'm giving him a 6 for cuteness, a 9 for creepiness, but an overall score of 10. So day 8 was the Yeti. This was a fairly straightforward build for me because I've built a Yeti or two before. I knew I wanted to do a blob version of that project and I had lots of white fur left over. This was the first monster in the series where we used an office hole punch to punch out a pupil. So that's a great technique if you're not good at painting tiny little circles. This was also the first project in the series where I mixed some food coloring into the DOS clay to tint it. You might remember, I think we used a little bit too much food coloring because I had a bit of an issue with some of the dye like leaching out of the clay. As I mentioned, we used fur on this project and this was the first monster in the series to have fur. I showed you how to cut through the back of it with a knife so you can glue it into strips onto your project. And we did use that technique a few times later on in the series. I really like how this one turned out. I'm sure she's going to be on display all winter long in my house. I'm giving her a 10 for cuteness, a 1 for creepiness, and a 9.5 overall. Day 10 brought us Frankenstein's monster. You'll remember we made the bolts for his head with some tubing from an old air pump and some cardboard circles. We also sewed up some strips of my paper mache paper to make it look like Frank's head was stitched together. I used lots of wrinkly paper on this one to make it look like his skin was a little too big for him. I think that technique was really effective. I love the translucent paint finish we did on him. You can see the brown from the paper poking through a little bit, and I think that's really effective for his character. Oh, this was the first in our series of monsters that was based on one of the old Universal Pictures monster movies. I really enjoyed researching that and learning about how that movie basically shaped every image of Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster, that has appeared in pop culture ever since. I really like this project. I'm going to give him a 7 for cuteness, a 7 for creepiness, and a 9 overall. So for day 10, we made the Goblin. And I have to admit, I had really no idea where I was going with the character design for this one. This was my first sketch for this monster and it's pretty awful. I don't know what's going on with the eyes there. In the end, I think what really helps the sculpture give Goblin is his great big goblin grin with all of the tiny little teeth poking out. You might remember I decided to add the teeth a little late into the process, and rather than sculpt a bunch of teeth out of air dry clay, we used the tips of some rounded toothpicks to make pointy little needle-like teeth. I think that worked out really well for a Goblin. I love the blue-gray color I chose for him. I think the wash and spatter techniques that we used to make him look dirty and grungy look really detailed despite being super easy techniques. I don't think he's very cute, but I do think that big smile and his little nose make him pretty endearing. So I'm gonna give him a 4 for cuteness. I think he's pretty creepy for a little guy. So I'm giving him an 8 for creepiness and an 8.5 overall. On day 11, we made this purely rotten jack-o'-lantern. I sculpted his teeth to look like pumpkin seeds, and even though you can't really tell in the final project, I thought that was a pretty clever idea. One technique we used on this guy for the first time in this series was the twisted paper texture that we put on his stem. I think it turned out looking really good and very viney, especially after we painted everything black and then used the dry brush paint technique. Stem aside though, I think the most notable thing on this pumpkin is the goo. I just shaved a bunch of muddy colors off of some chalk pastel and mixed it with my UV resin and slopped it on there so it was dripping out of his mouth and eyes. And this was a last minute decision, but I think it looks really disgusting. It's so gross, my 15-year-old daughter won't even look at it. I'm giving the jack-o'-lantern a 5 for cuteness, a 9 for creepiness, although he's probably more gross than creepy, but we don't have a category for that. I'm gonna give him an overall score of 9. The only thing stopping me from giving him a perfect score is that I think for a rotten pumpkin, it would have looked a lot better if I had left The finish, a little more black. It's such a bright orange, and I think making the flesh of the pumpkin a little more rotten looking would have made it perfect. But that said, I'm still super happy with that project. Day 12 was the toad. I remember day 12 because we had Thanksgiving dinner that day, and I used paper pulp on this project, and it took forever. It took 5 ever to dry. I learned so much about toads when I was researching the background story for this character. If you didn't watch the build video for this one, check it out. I think the history of toads and Halloween is really fun. I also learned that the toads where I live have gold eyes, which is pretty cool. So that's why we painted the toad's eyes gold. Since the toad was a simpler build, I showed you how to hide a watertight tube in his back so I could use the toad as a little vase to display some mums. I thought that was quite cute. This was also the only project where I used like the pulp method of paper mache. I almost never use this method. I think it's messy. It doesn't dry. It's hard to sculpt with, but I do have to admit it made a very good toad texture. I love the toad's judgy little frown. I think it's very cute. I think the toad would make a really good beginner sculpture project. I'm even thinking about doing an online workshop for this one because I think there's lots of people who would like a little toad and frog for their bookshelf. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. I'm giving the toad an 8 for cuteness. I think he's very cute in an ugly sort of way. I don't think he's very creepy at all, so he's getting a 1 there, but I'm giving him a 10 overall. Day 13 was the Minotaur. This was another one that was extra challenging in the blob shape. It's hard to make a half man, half bull without sculpting arms and legs. In the end, I think I did pull it off by emphasizing his manly pec muscles and giving him some human shoulders. This makes him look a little more like a bust than a blob, but I think it had to be done to make him look a little less bovine. Pool noodles featured heavily in this project. They became both his horns and his shoulders. I used some little black buttons for his eyes, and those would come back a few times in future monsters. I planned for a nice nose ring in this project and then completely forgot to put it in until I had finished editing the video. I would really like to replace this one with some brass wire at some point. I think it would look a lot better in gold. I love his little hairdo. I think that was a great touch. I'm not too sure about the proportions for this one. I think his horns are a little too big. His ears are definitely too big. I learned a lot about composition with this one, same as Ogre, so I'm gonna give this one the same marks as the Ogre. A 6 for cuteness, a 2 for creepiness, and a 7 overall. Day 14 brought us the Evil Fairy. This was the first sort of overtly feminine creature that we had to make, and I think her face turned out pretty well. She got nice high cheekbones, a little nose, and a grumpy little smirk. We used the same twisted paper technique from our pumpkin stem to make our fairy's a little messy bun. I think that turned out pretty well. I think her pipe cleaner flyaways are very silly, and I think that's fun. I sacrificed one of my plastic placemats that I always work on to make her wings. I also used black spray paint to paint them. So even though the wings look pretty good, I'm not sure the technique I used is very affordable or accessible. Spray paint is a pretty expensive tool, and not everybody has a heat gun or a safe space to use it. That said, I think our Evil Fairy looks pretty good. I'm gonna give her a 7 for cuteness, a 6 for creepiness, and a 7.5 overall. Day 15 was Gillman, or the creature from the Black Lagoon. I didn't really know a lot about the lore behind the creature when I started this project, so I had a lot of fun learning about him and the Universal Pictures monster movie that created him. I thought it was interesting that he was designed by the first woman to work in a special effects makeup studio. This is the second project where I forgot to film something major, and I had to build a second mouth on a Pringles can so that I could show the camera. I used a bunch of paper towel to make the bumps on Gillman's face, and then after that project, I started using that technique a lot more. I'm super happy with how he turned out. I think I did a really good job of simplifying the character design, but still keeping him very recognizable. I think I'm going to keep him up near the fish tank in my office. I'm going to give him a 6 for cuteness, 6 for creepiness, and a 9.5 overall. If I hadn't forgotten to film myself making the mouth, maybe I wouldn't have docked myself that half point. But, you know, I got to take something away for being a pain in my own ass. Day 16 was Mothman, and to date, that is the most viewed video in this series. I guess there's a lot of Mothman fans out there. Mothman was a simple build in the fact that I didn't need to build him a whole face, only eyes, but he was a complicated build in the fact that I needed to build a full set of wings, and wings are something I definitely struggle with. What ultimately worked for me was making some paper mache wing arms and then sewing some black fabric onto there. And then I soaked all that fabric in glue to make it stiff. And I actually really liked how that turned out, and it was relatively painless except for that little bit of hand sewing. I also like how I used the black fur to add a few accents to the character. I think that looks great. I'm gonna give Mothman a 9 for cuteness, 3 for creepiness, and a 10 overall. I think he's great. Day 17 was probably my most off the wall, out of the box character design, the mermaid. I really didn't want to make a beautiful mermaid, so I made this monstrosity instead, and I love her. I know she's probably not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but for me, she is weirdly wonderful. I love her fishy mouth and her big fishy tail and her little human boobs. I think she's just hilarious. I think if there were real mermaids in the ocean, they would definitely look more like this than this. In this one, I used sort of a sandwich technique to make the spines on the fins. This definitely gave me some ideas for how to make the bat wings that are coming up later. A lot of people really liked her drool, and I have to say that was a total accident. The resin kind of got away from me, and I decided to just cure it rather than try to clean it up. I think that adds to her charm. Hot take, but I'm gonna give her a 7 for cuteness. I'm gonna give her a 10 for creepiness and a 10 overall. Day 18 was our evil Scarecrow, and this one turned out so much better than I anticipated. He definitely went through an ugly phase where his head looked like a gumdrop, but when we used some previously enjoyed cheesecloth to give his face a burlap effect, it really started to come together. I also loved making his cardboard hat, and I think his overalls look pretty great. My only critique with this one is I wish I had gone a little grungier and dirtier with the paint finish. I'm really glad I took the time to do the stitching through his lips though. I think that's a nice creepy touch. This is one I might make again as like a larger, more complete sculpture because there's some ideas here I definitely am interested in playing with again. If you own a store and want to order a big Scarecrow for your window, hit me up and maybe we can make that video here. Anyhow, I'm gonna give this one a 7 for cuteness, 6 for creepiness, and a 9.5 overall. The Leprechaun was our day 19 project. I think he has one of the best faces in the bunch. He's just so silly. I got to make another mini hat for this one, and I just love how that turned out. I do have something to confess about him though. I never actually finished it. He has a big old bald spot, and that's why in all the final shots of him, you never see the back of his head. It was like 2 in the morning and I was realizing it was gonna take like at least another hour for me to finish the hair to fill in the back of his head. And I was so tired. So I just decided to film him only from the front and pretend that big bald spot wasn't there. And nobody said anything, so it was fine. I definitely will go in and finish the hair for in there. I'll post some pics on Instagram when I do. Bald spot aside, I'm gonna give him a balanced score of 7 for both cuteness and creepiness and an overall score of 9. Day 20 was our Grim Reaper project. This was the first project in the series where I used the pear-shaped cardboard to make the fabric folds. That technique worked really well. This is the only project in the series where the monster is holding a prop, but I had to give my Grim Reaper a little scythe. I don't have much to say about this one. It's a pretty simple character design, but I'm glad I didn't overcomplicate him. I'm super happy with how he turned out. He's getting a 10 for cuteness, a 5 for creepiness, and a 10 overall. There's nothing I would change about him. Day 21 was our bat. I love this guy. He's definitely a fan favorite in my house. I love his big ears and his goofy overbite and his silly little teeth. I was inspired by the Mermaid project where I used like a cardboard sandwich to make the spines on the mermaid's fins. And I thought that would work really well to make the fingers on the bat's wings. So I used a similar technique to make the wings, and that turned out really well. I'm definitely gonna be trying out more variations of that technique on projects in the future. I also really love the paint technique we used on this guy. It's really simple, but I can't think of another time I've dry brushed brown over black, and I think it looks really good. I give this guy a 10 for cuteness. I don't think he's really creepy at all, even though he's a bat, so I'm gonna give him a 1 for creepiness. I'm gonna give him a 10 overall because he's absolute perfection, even though he lost that one little tooth. When I finished this guy, all I wanted to do was make more bats, so there'll definitely be more of this guy in the future. Day 22. The Day 22 project still haunts me. Day 22 was Medusa. Nothing went smoothly for this project. I built 3 ugly faces for this one. I think they were all terrible, including the one we ended up with. I spent $50 on rubber snakes that didn't want to stick to her stupid ugly head. When I finished this one, I was kind of hoping I was doing the thing where I was like, oh no, you're being too critical of your own work. It's not that bad. You just need to walk away for a little bit. It's not. This thing is terrible. Right after this, I'm going to slice her open so I can recycle her insides, and the rest of her is going in the garbage. I hate her. She's not cute. She's not creepy. So she's getting a 1 for both of those. I'm gonna give her a 3 overall. I did learn a couple things, so we're gonna go with a 3. And also, I did finish her, so that's worth something. Let's move on. From one of my most hated projects on day 22 to one of my personal favorites on day 23, The Witch. I really loved researching the backstory on how witch symbolism in art history and pop culture has evolved and continues to evolve. I could have gone down that rabbit hole for hours. That history is complicated and fascinating, and it was really hard to keep it to 2 minutes for the intro of the build video. I love how her face came out. I love her big grin, and somehow it looks like she's got a little twinkle in her eye. I think this sculpture has a lot of character. I think her hat looks really good, and I think her faux fur hair turned out pretty great. I do love witches, so I'm so glad this one turned out really well. This is another one that I'm going to be keeping in my office year round. I'm going to give her an 8 for cuteness, a 6 for creepiness, and a 10 overall. Day 24 was another one I really enjoyed researching. It was the Little Green Man alien. I don't think I realized before starting this series just how much our culture uses green skin as a symbol for something supernatural or otherworldly. I also think it's really funny how the seed of an idea can grow in media, and that's as true now as it was in 1955 when the phrase little green man started to pop up in newspapers. I had a lot of fun making this one. I think using the display cloche as his space helmet was really fun. And I also liked assembling all the little toy bits to make the gear for his spacesuit. I definitely want to do more stuff like that. If I was doing this again, or if I give myself more time, I might have made his face have a little bit more personality. It's a little bit boring. That said, I really like this one, and my kids really like this one. And so if they think it's cool, I think it's cool. I'm going to give him an 8.5 for cuteness, and I don't think he's really creepy at all. So I'm going to give him a 2 for creepiness. Overall, I'm going to give him an 8.5. Day 25 is our vampire, Mr. Count Dracula. This is a tough one for me because I'm kind of meh on him, but so many people in the comments were saying that he's one of their favorites. I think I did a lot of good things on this one. I think his cape turned out really well, and I also think it was a clever idea to use the foam rollers as his hair. I think what bothers me about this one is that his eyes are so big and his head is so short that the proportions are really throwing me off. So if I could correct those proportions, I think I'd be happier with him. Also, as I said in the build video, he reminds me of a former coworker and it just really creeps me out. I know that's ridiculous, but I just can't get over it. So for that reason, this is kind of a cursed object for me. We might have to burn it. I'm giving it 5 for cuteness. I'm giving it a 10 for creepiness, and that's all related to the former coworker. Overall, I'm gonna give it a 6. Day 26 was our zombie, and I think that was also the day where I decided that there was no possible way I was going to be able to finish all the monsters before Halloween. So I decided that if I was going to be late, I was just going to take the time to finish these to the level I wanted, and I think that really shows with this guy. If I was still trying to meet my deadline, I wouldn't have had the time to rip off his first mouth and make a smaller one. And I think that choice really paid off. I love how his brain turned out. I love the paint and glue we put in his hair. I'm just really happy with the paint job on this one. When I finished him kind of like the bat, I just wanted to make more and build myself a whole zombie army. And so maybe that'll happen one day. But in the meantime, I'm loving this zombie boy. For me, he's the perfect balance of both cute and creepy. So he's getting 10s for both, and he's getting an overall score of 10. Day 27 was Bigfoot, my favorite guy. I've loved Bigfoot forever, but this was actually the first paper mache Bigfoot I've built. I still want to do a much larger one, but this was a great place to start. This one was obviously derivative of the Bumble from the Rankin and Bass Rudolph movie. I think it works really well for a Bigfoot. I like how I made his nose. Of course, I forgot to film that one, so I had to remake one and then do this jacked up transition. But it was fine. You got the info you needed. I'm very glad I made feet. I think it makes his identity really clear, but also like adding feet makes it look somehow weirder that he has no arms. But whatever, he's a cute sculpture. We like him at my house. I'm giving him a 10 for cuteness, a 1 for creepiness, and a 9.5 overall. Day 28 was the Gargoyle. I think I did a lot of things right with this one. I'm really happy with how the wings turned out. I just got some cardboard damp and folded it and let it dry in that position, and then it held the folds. This worked so well. We also mixed a lot of baking soda into some paint, and this combined with a black wash worked really well to make a stone finish. I think that stone finish looks really great. I think his eyes and his nose area turned out pretty well, but I think with his mouth, the proportions are off just a bit. Also, some of you noticed and mentioned in the comments that his teeth had completely disappeared by the end. I definitely should have made them a lot bigger in the first place. But I still kind of like this goofy guy. There's definitely a lot I would change if I made another gargoyle though. I'm giving him a 5 for cuteness, a 3 for creepiness, and a 7 overall. Day 29 is our devil, and I'm super happy with how he turned out. I think I did a great job on his face and the proportions. On this sculpture, I made most of his face out of paper mache, but I used air dry clay to make his nose, and I'm so glad I did. His nose is so cute. I used the same technique to make the devil's wings as I did on the bat project. We used the twisted paper technique from the jack-o'-lantern to make his little goatee. His forehead bumps were made with a really similar technique to all the bumps on the Gillman's face. So this was a fun project at the end of the series that really pulled a lot of techniques from the other monsters together. This one was a tricky one to research and present the lore for. This is also my video with the most dislikes, and I think that's probably because this monster is part of a living tradition for some people. As a paper mache monster though, I think he kicks ass. I'm gonna give him a 10 for cuteness, an 8 for creepiness, and a 10 overall. I really think he's got a lot of great attitude in his face, and again, this is probably one that's gonna live in my office year round. Day 30 was our monster that I put the most hours into, and that was the werewolf. Part of what took so long to make this guy was that we made him with a fully open jaw and teeth and tongue. This added a good amount of time, but I don't think he'd look half as good with his mouth closed. With this project, I also wanted to try to make him look furry without using faux fur, so we experimented with using some kite-shaped cardboard pieces to make some spiky tufts of hair. And I think that turned out really well. I would definitely do that again. Another time-consuming detail on this project was his buffalo check shirt. But I mean, just look at him. Look how good that came out. I like the markings we painted on his face, but I also like when he was just all black. Kind of go back and forth on whether or not I should leave him or paint him black again. I don't think my youngest daughter will let me change him though. She really likes wolves and she likes the gray wolf the best. So she likes how this guy turned out and she doesn't want me to change him. I'm giving this guy an 8 for cuteness, a 6.5 for creepiness, and a 9.5 overall. Day 31 is our final monster, the Kraken. We made this guy some really cool eyes by marbling together some light blue-green and some glow-in-the-dark oven-baked polymer clay. I really like how those came out. We also made him some really great legs from some foam rollers I got at the dollar store. I think those foam rollers are such a gift to crafters. I keep thinking of ways to use them, and now it's just come to the point where I'm keeping a few bags of them in different sizes in the shop all the time, you know, just in case a sudden need for a foam hair roller comes up. I really like how he turned out. I might actually make him a little Santa hat because I think his glittery green finish makes him look a little bit like a Christmas decoration. It could just be the time of year, but I think it would be great for my family to have a Christmas Kraken. I'm gonna give him a 7 for cuteness, a 6 for creepiness, and a 9 overall. And that's our 31 monsters. Let me know your favorites in the comments. Did you agree with my scores? Are there any monsters that I didn't like as much that you absolutely love? I'm really interested to hear how my thoughts on my work align with yours. I think that would be really interesting to know. Like, am I able to look at these sculptures objectively, or am I just out to lunch? Are there any monsters you would want to see me revisit? Are there any that you would want to see as the full-blown sculpture, not just a blob? Let me know in the comments. I do try to get back to everyone who takes the time to leave me a comment. I want to say thank you for watching this series. Thanks for all the comments, the likes, the hypes. I do see them all and I do appreciate each and every one. It really helps me to stay motivated to keep making videos. If you want to see more kick-ass art on a cheap-ass budget, make sure you're subscribed to my channel. You can follow me on the socials. I'm at Jane Sawyer Makes everywhere. I have a website, janesawyermakes.com. There's lots of free templates and tutorials and other goodies there. Check it out, go make a monster, and I'll see you on the next one.